Can you also activate the transcription? Great. Okay, welcome everyone to our monthly breakfast co-sponsored by the Association for Conflict Resolution of Greater New York and the City University of New York Dispute Resolution Center at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. I'm Maria Volpe, a professor at John Jay College, and started these breakfasts after 9/11. Until March 2020, we met in person at John Jay College. For those of you who are new to the breakfast, since April 2020, we have been meeting virtually, and delighted that we are now joined by our colleagues around the globe. These breakfasts are posted, the recordings are posted on the ACR-GNY website each month at www.acr-gny.org. These breakfasts would not be possible every month if it wasn't for this wonderful team that I work with, including Julie Denny, Chuck Newman, Nikki Borofsky, and Matthew Latimer. We don't know what the future of the format, the modality will be for our breakfast. For the time being, we will be continuing this virtual format. We have not had any large gatherings at the college. If things change, when they change, we will sure let everyone know. For those of you who are on the breakfast who would like to be connected with everyone, we do have a listserv that you can all join. Nikki, if you could put that back in the link again, that would, in the chat, that would be great. You will receive all kinds of announcements, including those for the breakfast. And I'm so delighted that today, a very dear colleague who I've known for decades is our speaker. Michael and I go back to, we just figured it out a short while ago, probably the 90s, when the former iteration of ACR was around, known as SPIDER. Some of you probably never heard of SPIDER, the Society of Professionals in Dispute Resolution. So it's so great to see you in this new modality, Michael. Couldn't even dream of it back in the 90s. We probably have more on the call than we had in the whole field back then. But here we are, celebrating a whole new way of presenting and sharing and collaborating and working with each other. So thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to turn it over to Julie, who will do a more formal introduction of Michael.
Yeah, SPIDER was the precursor to ACR, for those of you who don't recognize that acronym. And I wanted to add something. Please know that every month the Zoom link will change. We do this in order to avoid Zoom bombers. So don't put this month's Zoom link in your calendar so you can just click on it next month. It will change every month. So let's talk about Michael Lang. Michael has mediated family, workplace, and organizational disputes for more than 40 years. He put this in writing, so I'm allowed to say it. He has designed and presented introductory and advanced mediation and conflict management courses, workshops, webinars, both here in the United States and abroad. He created and was the founding director of one of the first graduate programs in conflict resolution in the US at Antioch College, University. And he served in a similar role at the Royal Roads University in Victoria, British Columbia. He's known for his practice of reflective practice, which he's going to talk about today. And he's written The Practitioner's Guide to Reflective Practice in Conflict Resolution and co-authored The Making of a Mediator, Developing Artistry in Practice. And he currently facilitates or co-facilitates 9 monthly online reflective practice groups for mediators. I'm thrilled to say that he's going to have one of those groups demonstrate today. He's, along with Susan Terry, recently formed the Reflective Practice Institute to offer training programs and to provide mentoring and to assist in the initiation and management of reflective practice groups. And he's also created a video series, In Their Voices. There will be links to all of these in the chat eventually. And finally, along with Susan Terry, he's the co-series editor for the Practitioner's Guide series, a joint venture of ACR and Roman and Littlefield. Michael, take it away.
Thanks, Julie.
Don't say it.
Not saying a word, except thank you. I really want to thank everyone who's involved, Maria and Nikki and Julie and Chuck and Matthew, for inviting me to be part of what really is an historic series of gatherings. The vision to have created these breakfasts and discussions is extraordinary, and to be able to carry them out consistently over a period of 20 years is simply phenomenal. I'm delighted to be here. I'm honored to be here. I feel a bit humbled, really, to be part of such an extraordinary program. So thank you. I'm going to share my screen and tell you a little bit about reflective practice, and then I'll describe what we've got in store for the morning. If the screen share works. No, it's not. I'm not sure why I'm not being able to get my.
It popped up for a second, Michael.
Second.
It was an email from Chuck to you.
No, that's not it. That's email. I have. Oh, I'm frustrated.
Yeah, Nikki, do you have it?
Here,
No, I'm gonna.
No, here it is.
here's the screen.
Just pull up another screen, Michael. You're sharing, but the wrong thing.
There we are.
There we
Can you
are.
see that?
Beautiful.
Oh, perfect. Great. Thanks very much. Yeah, we're good. My focus really for a long time, and I'm going to tell a story in a second to give you a sense of the date, is on excellence in practice. That's what I'm really interested in, is how we become the best possible practitioners that we can become. I don't see this as a measurement that we all have to achieve a particular standard. Excellence, and I called it originally or earlier artistry, is something that's unique to each person. But the idea of striving toward, moving toward, and attempting to become the best possible practitioner we can is what I have been focused on since. Now I'm going to tell you a story. And I'm using my little canine friend, whom I don't know. This is just a stock photo, but it's a great illustration of the story I'm going to say about how I first got interested in reflective practice. So I had in 1985, and again, Julia, yes, I am dating myself. In 85, I was a family mediator in Maine. I was, in fact, the only family mediator in Maine at the time. And I attended a conference of family mediators in San Rafael, California that summer. And because I practiced in such a solitary way, I mean, we all do in our own mediation rooms, but I really had no colleagues to speak to, nobody who could I could bounce ideas off of, nobody who could in any other way help me think about the work that I was doing. So I made a decision that when before I arrived at the conference, that when any of the presenters was setting up a role play and asked for a mediation volunteer, mine would be the first paw up. And sure enough, the very first morning, I attended a presentation on Ericksonian hypnotherapy approaches to mediation. This is based on the work of Milton Erickson, a noted psychiatrist, and having studied family therapy, I'd heard about and read about Milton Erickson, so I was intrigued. And the first hour and a half was a pretty typical kind of presentation about all of these different techniques. We took a break, came back, and they set up the role play, and mine was, in fact, the first hand up. And the particular role play itself is not important. What happened is that the role play went on for somewhat close to 30 minutes. It was a long time. I had no idea. I was just in it and focused on what was happening. And I had no idea how long we were going. But it was stopped when the two presenters came up and stood on either side of me, each one putting a hand on my shoulder and telling me that I had been brilliant, that it was excellent. And the two people who were playing the role of husband and wife also said that what I had done was extraordinary. Well, you can imagine, young kid from Maine, being in a group of people, I didn't know a soul there. It was an extraordinarily positive thing. I was just feeling elated, and people would talk to me and comment about this throughout the 3 days of the conference. But we were staying at a university, small college, and I would go back to my Spartan dorm room at night and lie there looking up at the ceiling and feeling like I was a fraud. And the reason I felt that is because I hadn't a clue what I had done that made a difference. I had a sense of the kind of interventions I was using, but I had no idea why they were of any value to anybody, let alone the two people who were playing the roles. And I really puzzled over this. It was a bittersweet sort of experience for me. And it left me wondering, how is it that we can learn about our experiences how could I have taken that experience and learned something from it that when I got back home, I could add it to my repertoire. I could make it a useful part of my practice. At the same meeting, I met a guy who has become a longtime friend, Robert Benjamin, who suggested that I might be interested in reading a book called The Reflective Practitioner by this guy named Donald Schoen, who is a professor at MIT. And he said, a lot of the examples are architecture, but don't worry about it. You'll like the book. So I thought about it. I got home, got busy with family and work, and finally 6 months later, I picked up the book and I read it. And I had one of those moments as I was reading this book, like the cartoon characters, when you see them astonished about something and their eyes bug out of their head. Well, that was me. I said, this makes sense. This helps me understand that there's a way that I can learn through and from my experiences in order to improve the quality of the work I do so that I'm more competent for the benefit of the clients, but I'm also more confident in myself. Here's the agenda for our time together. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what reflective practice is and why it's important and its benefits, and describe what reflective debrief is. It really is a specialized kind of conversation that we use in order to help someone learn from their own experiences. And we're going to not only talk about, describe what a reflective practice group is, you're going to get to sit in on a reflective practice group. I'm going to be joined by 6 colleagues. We have been together as a reflective practice group sponsored by the Academy of Professional Family Mediators for over 3 years. And 6 of the 7 are going to join me today, and we are going to demonstrate what actually happens, because I can talk to you about all of these ideas, and I love to talk about reflective practice and its benefits and its advantages and what it does. But I think seeing will make a difference. That's what we believe in any event. So that's what we're going to do. And following the demonstration, there'll be time for Q&A. There should be a good 20 minutes, perhaps longer, for that. So I also want to say that if you have questions as I'm presenting, please ask them. During the demonstration, we're going to be focused on what we're doing, and we're not going to be interested in or able to focus on and pay any attention to questions, just so you know that. Okay. So here are a couple of quotes that I've drawn from to support the idea that what we're trying to do in reflective practice is learn from moments in our experience that are unusual, that may be awkward, that are surprising, that are puzzling, that can be confusing, or, as my experience at the conference, elating. The surprise can be something extraordinary that happened, that we want to understand. How did that occur? What was it that I saw, thought, felt, heard that suggested a particular intervention that proved to be amazingly successful? And so the way in which we enter into reflective practice is to, there are two qualities that are critical. One, having the attitude of being a lifelong learner, that it isn't just trial and error, that we really want to learn our craft and become more and more adept and resilient and resourceful in what we do. So it's a commitment to learning continually, not just doing the same thing over and over again. And the second is have the humility as we are working to experience surprise or puzzlement or confusion, to not be perfect, because it's in those imperfect moments, those moments when we do feel a bit awkward or uncertain, that there's an enormous opportunity for learning. So here's some of the reasons why, I've written 2 books. Obviously, I could give you a lot more reasons for reflective practice than this, but here are just a summary of a few. And remember, the ultimate goal is to be as facile and effective as we can possibly be in our work. Part of this is, and you'll see in the last item, the idea that self-discovery leads to genuine learning and mastery. This is very much akin to the idea of self-determination that we believe in terms of mediation practice. That there are a couple of ways in which we can learn. One is that we can be taught, we can be told, we can be given information. and we absorb that information, and that's fine. That's a I tell, you receive. But there's another phase to learning, which is the integration, the incorporation of the information, making it one's own so that you can use it effectively. And our belief is that self-discovery, the learning that comes from our own exploration of a puzzling situation and the discovery of an answer, that's what really leads to enduring learning and mastery. So it's time for another short story. This one is occurred on a flight. I was returning to Sarasota from a trip, and the last leg was a short flight from Atlanta. And it was in the evening, and I had the aisle seat. I was getting myself comfortable, and I noticed my companion to the left in the middle seat was a girl of 8 or 9, and she was on her knees, and she had a controller in her hand and was fixed. Her gaze was fixed on the seat back screen, and she was playing some sort of a game, which I didn't understand. I wasn't sure of at the time. And on the other side, at the window, was a man, presumably her father, and in fact, that's who he was. And she was playing, actually, she was playing tic-tac-toe. I sneaked a look. I just couldn't resist the idea of looking over and seeing. She was so enthusiastic. You could just see from her posture how fixed she was on this game. And she was playing not with X's and O's, but with pelicans and fish. And she was the pelican. And she played a number of games and then turned to her father and she said, "Dad, this game's no fun. Nobody wins. What's up?" You know, she was frustrated. And he said, so what's the problem? And she said, "Well, I don't know. I keep playing the game and nobody wins." And he said, what can you do about it? She said, "I don't know." And then she said, "I'm going to put my pelican in the corner." He said, "Okay." And she did. And then she started bouncing in her seat on her knees because she was winning. One game after the next, I don't know how many she won, 4 or 5, maybe 6. And then again, the game reverted to ties repeatedly. Nobody won. And she again turned to her father and she said, "Dad, it's happening again. Nobody's winning." And the dad said, "What do you think you should do?" And she said, he said, "Why do you think this is happening?" And she said, "You know, Dad, I think the computer figured out what I'm doing and it's playing against me." He said, "Okay, what are you going to do?" She said, "I'm going to put my pelican in the middle this time." He said, "Okay." And she did. And the same thing happened again, which is she won a few games and then it began, and she began to get frustrated when when there was no winner. And at that time, we were about to land in Sarasota. And so she put the controller away. And I just thought, as I sat there, this is the most perfect example I could think of. It was simple, it was authentic, it was elegant, it was unrehearsed. It was an example of how we can learn from our experience if we're given the opportunity to discover things for ourselves. Now, this dad, he had probably in his lifetime played hundreds, if not thousands of games of tic-tac-toe. He could have easily have said to her, "Try this, try this, try this," but he didn't. He never offered a piece of advice. He only offered encouragement and asked questions. And that is what we do in our reflective conversations. We ask questions to nurture self-exploration that will lead to self-discovery. Here are a few of the foundations, sort of foundational beliefs about reflective practice, some of which I've really already identified. One I want to highlight here, and that's that theory shapes practice. It really is fundamental to the way in which we look at practice situations. And that is, when we ask somebody, we talk to someone about their experience, we often want to know their beliefs that shaped the action. We don't want to just know what happened, what you did, what they did, what you did in response, what they did in response. I frequently will ask a question similar to this. When you were doing X, what were you thinking? When you decided that this was a good time to meet separately with the parties, what was going on? What was the motivation for you? What were you hoping to achieve? All questions that encourage the person to think about their experience and to talk about it, not defend it, not further elaborate on a description of it, but to talk about the process that led from what happened in the head to what came out the mouth in terms of a question, an observation, or a process choice. So I thought it would be useful because you'll be able to see one example today of a practice dilemma, as we call it. These are situations, they don't have to be, they can be quite dramatic, and they can be quite mundane and very ordinary. These are in reflective practice groups. And earlier, Chuck Newman asked me about confidentiality, and I'm describing them this way in order both to protect the confidentiality of the mediator involved, as well as the parties. Just giving you just a thumbnail. And I'm going to talk about just one of them. Because this mediator, and it's all right for me to be able to describe this in this way. This mediator was working on a dispute that involved two neighbors who were disputing over the boundary of the property. And the mediator had initially approached it as, this is a legal and a financial matter. Those are the issues, that's how we're going to deal with it. And yet found that the person who was seemingly most interested in the dispute and having it resolved was resistant to every single thing that the mediator was suggesting by way of process, not resolution. And we explored with the mediator what was his thinking about the idea that this was a legal and financial matter. We talked about that. And ultimately I said, is there any other way that you could conceivably look at this dispute? Is there any other way to analyze it? And through that analysis, make some decisions about the kind of interventions you want to make. And he thought for a while and he said, I'm not sure. I said, well, what do you know about the people? And he said, well, they're neighbors. And then he said, oh, that's the one thing I hadn't really paid much attention to. They see each other every day. They are neighbors in a residential community. That one of the elements that has to be addressed as part of the mediation, along with the legal and the financial, is the fact that they have this ongoing and will have an ongoing relationship no matter the particular outcome. So it was a wonderful example of this person discovering this question for himself. And I also know in subsequent communication with him that he followed up on that. And it has been a helpful way of reframing the conflict situation. So We meet as groups, as Julie mentioned in the introduction. I work with 9 groups over the course of a month, and they operate in a very similar way. One is unique, which is a group sponsored by the ABA, the mediation committee of the ABA section of dispute resolution, because it's a drop-in group and anybody can come for 1 or more meetings. All of the other groups are fixed membership and meet on a regular basis, but they all operate in the same way. It's a non-judgmental discussion. We want to be very careful that we don't second guess somebody. We don't want to put somebody in a position of having to defend themselves, because then there's no real opportunity to go further and to learn from it. One of the other features that's important is that it emphasizes individual learning. I mean, when you think about the kind of courses that we take, the mediation training courses, whether they're introductory, they're advanced, the continuing ed programs, they're focused on collective learning, and necessarily so. You've got a group of people, and it is, you know, each individual is going to take something from it, but the focus is on the group. Whereas in this instance, we work 1-to-1 so that there's an emphasis on individualized learning. At the same time, what you would experience if you were in one of our reflective practice groups is that even if you weren't the one who was presenting a practice dilemma, you would learn something significant as well. Everybody takes something away from the conversation, even though the focus is on just one person. So here's the basic guidelines we use for how we operate the groups. And again, I say these groups all operate with the same basic principles. And I also want to say, as an aside, I've been talking in so far, and what you're going to see in the demonstration are examples from mediation practice. But in fact, this process of reflective conversation, reflective debrief, is applicable to any form of professional practice: conflict coaching, facilitation, law, social work, nursing, education. It's even used in sports coaching, if you can imagine. So, so these are our basic ideas. We start with the idea that that the person who's presenting gets to choose the issue. We don't choose the issue for them. They do a very brief presentation of the facts, and then they state the question that they're struggling with. And that's what we follow along with. We don't try to second guess and think that there must be something else involved. And that follows all the way through, including that when they've reached the limit, when they have said, I've learned what I can learn in this time, we stop. Even if, and I find it challenging sometimes, because I'll have another dozen questions in my mind that I'd like to ask. But when the person says they stop, they stop. We don't go further. So we use questions. We don't tell. Our job is not to get somebody to understand something, and we don't try to reassure. We're not unsympathetic people. We're very compassionate and empathetic, but reassurance isn't part of the process. It can occur afterward. When people say, gee, you know, that was a difficult experience, or I had something like that, and I know I have a sense of what you went through. That can happen after the fact, but not while we're doing the debrief. These are some guidelines that we use for the kinds of questions that we ask. They're very straightforward. There is nothing to participate in a reflective practice group. You don't need to learn any new skills. There's nothing It's just utilizing the knowledge and the skills that we already have within our own profession. We might need to tailor the questions to make sure that they are just open-ended, inviting and encouraging, rather than interrogating. But we all know how to ask good questions, and that's the foundation of the work that we do together. So we're going to, in just a couple of minutes, we're going to start our reflective practice group and invite you to join us and watch. But while we're doing that, we ask you to think about these two questions. What did you notice? And what are you still curious about? And this is not about the content, but about the engagement, the interaction, the process that's going on. So the last two slides are sort of a bit of self-aggrandizement, if you don't mind. This is actually from a quote from Samuel Beckett, the poet and playwright. And the full quote is, "Ever tried, ever failed? Try again, fail better." And my son, who is an artist, created this piece. And so I'm fond of it both for its content and for and my affection and delight in my son. Lastly, this is the book that I have written about reflective practice and conflict resolution, and the publisher, Rowman and Littlefield, is offering a 30% discount through the end of the year for anybody who would like to purchase it. It's available in both digital and print format. And lastly, I've provided my email address. And I do so because I am eager to hear from colleagues who want to learn more about this thing called reflective practice, who may want to start their own reflective practice group and want to know how to do that. Or they may want to read articles about reflective practice. I've probably collected 100 or 150 articles that I gladly share. So I offer my email address genuinely and hope that some of you will get in touch and ask further about reflective practice. Okay. Well, thank you. And we are, if the gang is all here, I know Georgia's here.
The gang is all here and they have been starred, and I'm ready to highlight them whenever you are ready to start.
Let's do it, please.
The demonstration.
Thank you so much.
Excellent. We'll now just start to highlight for everybody in the meeting the players who will be participating in this next portion of our meeting.
Good. There's Andi and Laurie. Great. Hi, Josh.
Good morning.
Hey.
Kristyn, and it's Tracey-Leigh. Oh my goodness. The gang is here.
Everybody is here, so we will proceed. And for everybody else, there were a couple questions, but I think they can hold until after this demonstration, and then there'll be a dedicated Q&A period afterwards. So take it away, Michael.
Thanks so much, Nikki. Each of my colleagues is going to introduce herself and himself. I just want to say, by way of further introduction, you know, I've already mentioned that we have been meeting together for over 3 years and have shared a great deal about and learned a great deal about one another's practices, and have become, though I've only physically met one. I've met Josh once. Everybody else I know only as little boxes on the screen, and hope that gets remedied someday. But that's how I know them. A couple of people, for example, Kristyn and Andi, who are from Arizona, know each other, and Georgia and and Laurie from California know each other. So we're going to just operate as our group for the next 30 minutes or so. And you'll just see, and we want you to keep those two questions in mind. What are you noticing about the way we interact? And what are you still curious about? So if you would introduce yourselves, and on my screen, I'm just going to call out your names if you don't mind, because that'll be simpler. Andi, you're first. Just who you are and where you are. Be great. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Andi Paus, and I am in Scottsdale, Arizona.
Great. Georgia?
I'm Georgia Daniels, and I am in Claremont in Southern California.
Laurie?
I'm Laurie, Amaya, and I'm in the Pasadena area of Southern California.
Thanks, Laurie. Josh?
I'm Josh and I'm in Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
Great. Hi, Kristyn.
I'm Kristyn Carmichael. Good morning, and I'm joining you from Phoenix, Arizona.
Great. And Tracey-Leigh.
Good morning, I'm Tracey-Leigh Wessels, and I'm from Durban, South Africa.
Okay. So the way we begin is we ask someone, because we never know in advance in the way our groups meet, who's going to present something for this demonstration. We thought it would be pretty important that at least somebody was designated to do that, and that's Andi. And the way our groups function is that I usually start out by asking some questions, and then everybody joins in. So Andi, go right ahead, please.
I'm ready. I have issues. That's a larger issue we can talk about later, but I have some mediation concerns. So I have two cases right now that are very similar. They are pro per mediations, where I'm just meeting with the couples together. And what's happening is I have a strong male. This is a family law case, so they're divorcing. So I have a strong husband that is the more significant breadwinner, and I have the wife. Both wives make significant money or have significant money, but they're interested in receiving spousal maintenance, even though in my mind, they're not qualified for maintenance. And I'm trying to work through the process with them, the process of discovery of what are we really asking for? What do we really need? What is the request for spousal maintenance? And working through sort of difficult wives. And then the husband both husbands are acting the same in that they are saying, I will never pay spousal maintenance. You're not entitled to spousal maintenance. And so I'm trying to work the process, and then I keep having to sort of rein the husband in while working with the wife and keeping everybody in conversation mode. And I'm really struggling with that. I feel like both of them are not feeling heard and sort of trying to rush through the process. Why can't we just stop this? We know she's not entitled to spousal maintenance. And then we have the wives saying, I know I have millions in assets, but I still think that I'm entitled to spousal maintenance. So I feel like we're having the same conversation over and over again, and we're not making any progress. So both of them are still ongoing, pending, trying to figure out sort of how to move them forward and have some good conversation about that without losing them.
Yeah. Andi, what's your sense of of the situation? In other words, what sort of explanation do you have for the behaviors that you're seeing?
Well, I feel like the wives are fearful. There's going to be significant change, even though I think they both can, support themselves and have the assets that they need or the income that they need. But there is going to be a significant change. So I feel like there's some fear involved in that. The husbands are interesting. I don't have that part figured out. The you're not entitled and I'll never pay, so let's just move forward. I mean, both of the husbands are in positions of power in their employment. So they're used to, being heard and being respected and people jumping to do what is demanded of them. So those are the descriptors of the husbands that I have.
So they're used to giving direction and being leaders.
Right.
And what if anything have you been doing with respect to you say that you think that the wives in these instances are feeling fearful. How do they express that?
Well, one of the wives has significant sole and separate assets, and she's going to have significant marital assets, millions. But we are concerned about whether we should have to participate in a $10,000 loan that she would be responsible for $5,000. So, and maybe that's, I don't know why I interpret that as fear. It just feels like I have this pile over here and I just can't bring myself to let go of these tiny things. So I feel like there's this micro focus on things.
So, I mean, sorry, Mike, did I cut you off?
Nope, you're good.
So one of the things we know is that, and this is true for everybody who goes through a divorce, regardless of the circumstances, really for pretty much anybody in conflict, that as a result of what's happening in the mediation, there's going to be some change. And everybody reacts in their own way to change. And one way can be fear. But if you were to look at this and say, well, maybe it's not fear that's motivating her, what might it be?
Well, it might be, I don't want to get divorced. I don't want to end the relationship. And so I'm going to focus on things that aren't that important in order to prolong the process of the divorce. I don't feel like there's any infidelity or, I'm mad at you because of those sorts of things. There's no other sort of waste issues, gambling or, alcohol and drugs. So I don't feel like it's that. I feel like that's now that I think about it, I think it is in one of them, he basically said, hey, I'd like to get divorced. Let's do mediation. How about tomorrow? Kind of thing. So she was rushed into the process and still sort of reeling from the announcement as we're getting into it. So that's a good point.
What does that signify to you in terms of the work that you do with her?
I think that it needs to be recognized. I think she needs to be acknowledged that she's still working through some things, and that her showing up and participating at his request and doing it in the mediation process is worth being acknowledged. And giving her some grace as far as maybe longer time between meetings, or making sure she feels comfortable, those sorts of things, to make sure she's ready for the process emotionally.
Mhm. So one of the ways, if you wanted to test out that hypothesis, right, that idea that maybe it is the pacing of things and the fact that hasn't really adjusted yet to the idea of divorce, that one way to test out that idea would be to see if you could stretch out the time between meetings.
Right.
Any other ideas you have about how you might approach that?
My struggle is that although easy to stretch out meeting times for me and for her, I have the husband saying, let's go. We all know how this is going to turn out. She's not going to get maintenance, and I'm never paying maintenance. And that is the balance of trying to figure out how that works.
I mean, we're focusing right initially on the wife and her experience, but that experience doesn't come in a vacuum.
Right. Yes.
Right. There's somebody else there in the room that needs consideration.
Yes. And I guess part of what I'm learning from that piece is knowing that she needs more time, is normalizing the the longer period of time between the meeting. You guys probably need more time to do homework, to think about this, to consult with experts, or whoever you need to talk to. And so maybe we do take 3 weeks between meetings instead of 2 weeks, and don't give them really a lot of option, so that we're working with her schedule and he doesn't know that there's a different schedule.
Well, and let's look at what are your other options, because pacing is one way that would that if the issue for her is, because we don't know, because we're not in her mind yet, if ever, if pacing is, if the need for more time to adjust is important to her, then what other interventions could you consider that might be helpful?
I always think about whether some outside support would be helpful, whether it's a counselor or a lawyer or a financial person. Maybe she needs to feel more comfortable with her financial situation and needs to see it differently than she's seeing it right now, just in a list. So I could offer her or we could talk through what might be helpful as far as further information for her to feel comfortable. So is that, here are some people you might think about talking to as far as experts.
Because the real challenge is, among other things, or the first challenge is, you don't know what she needs. I mean, even if your assessment is right, and that is that she may not be fully on board with the divorce, emotionally and in other ways, not fully on board. The ways in which that she might find useful are varied. We don't know. It might be that pacing has nothing to do with it for her. It might be that independent advice on some matters or another is not the thing. So how would you explore with her what she needs in order to be an effective participant in the mediation?
That's hard because I think what you said is right, that she probably doesn't know what she needs and isn't recognizing that she's struggling per se.
I have a question to piggyback on that, Andi, which is, I know you said that she has assets. I know we're talking kind of maybe one or both, has assets and has resources, but what's their management of funds been, their personal access? What is the meaning of the support to them in relation to management and dollars?
That's a great question, because I think that she's been saving all of that. She's to the age where she could probably dip into a lot of it, and but she's been saving it. So, and then just living off of his income. So that might be a great way to work on this, is to talk about how she might gather information about how to use her money differently, and who might be able to help her with that. Because when we did sort of work through the thought process about funds, she doesn't have the thought process of, I'm going to, even have interest or growth or whatever on her money. So she's not thinking in that direction. So maybe she does need more information about how to use her money differently after the divorce.
Sounds like she's had her money socked away and she's been living on his money. So she's not seeing why that should change.
Right. Yes, there's going to be a big shift in that. So maybe she does need to talk to a professional, or at least we need to talk through that in the mediation about what that looks like, or walk her through some plans, if I can get him to participate in basically being quiet for a while.
Well, it's interesting because I'm wondering how you sort of described husbands, Carl, as sort of, control management, sort of sounds kind of overbearing, like they're the ones in charge, and how that plays into the development of sort of separate independence.
Right.
Like how you can use that possibly.
Right. Yeah, that an opportunity exists for her to become separate and independent. Sort of bringing her attention to the thought process of, let's focus on what we have and how we can use it moving forward without his income.
So you have behavior that you identify.
Mm-hmm.
Her behavior, which for you sort of reluctant, holding back a bit. And you've now got 3 different ideas that you've come up with that might make a difference to her. Pacing might make a difference. The piece you and Laurie were just talking about, thinking about how she's going to use her money. Another one would just be getting general advice about her money. All of which those are all potential interventions. So if you were going to do any of those, what happens to the husband?
Well, I've really asked for patience and talked about that the process is only going to work if everyone is satisfied with the outcome. And if we rush the process and force somebody into an outcome, that then we don't have a durable agreement. So I've talked about those things, and asked for patience on that piece. And so I think that, and I think that's sort of working. I've also really tried to allow him to talk about why, why is this so important as far as getting done quicker and those sorts of things. So I guess and I'm trying to balance and trying to just make sure that they feel balanced in that, because he says really hurtful things and then we sort of get sidetracked so that we can address what he said and whether she'd like to talk through that. So I guess I'm just going to have to continue to ask for, some patience on that side.
Yeah. See, I'm thinking, and I'll ask one more thing and then I'll be quiet in case any of you others would like to ask questions too, is although you started talking about it as a problem having to do with the content, the substance of an agreement, whether it's the $10,000 loan or the alimony payments, what you're now describing really are process sorts of concerns. How the process is managed so they have the ability, and you have the ability to help them talk about the content and get resolution on the content. Does that make sense?
I think that's very true.
And if these are process kinds of questions, who helps make those decisions? Who makes those decisions about what the process looks like?
I mean, I'm in control of the process. I always say, it's your process. We can do this the way that it works best for you, but I'm the process leader.
And what's their role, if any?
In the process, you mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I think they have to have buy-in to the process. And
so how would you get them to how do you help them achieve that?
Isn't the answer always ask questions? Ask questions, talk about what might be helpful to them, recognize what is going on and just talk about the process piece, for sure.
So that's one possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's see whether, if you don't mind, Andi, let's see if any of the others have some questions as well.
Well, can I just put out oh, sorry, is that Tracey-Leigh? Oh no, you go ahead.
No, you go. No, Josh, you go first.
Well, just real quick, Michael said it perfectly, and that kind of mirrors that. In my head, I started off thinking about granular questions and wondering about the legality of alimony in your state and how specific you tend to be with regard to the role of law, explaining the law to your clients and stuff like that. But the real question underlying it is, do you have a wife and husband who are willing to participate in your process? And how would you know? So the real question is just a process question that I have. How would you gauge whether you're dealing with two people who are ready, in every meaning of the word, to reach a negotiated, fair outcome?
That's a great question. I mean, I think I'm always observing reactions and making sure that, but definitely in the if there's a power imbalance, making sure at least we have, in this case, a wife that's understanding and that is, is knowledgeable about what's happening, and participating and not shutting down. And, I try not to talk about the law unless we really need to, because who cares what the court would do? I say that all day, every day. Who cares what the court would do? What do you guys want to do? So yeah, I guess just always really kind of taking the temperature. And when people start talking about, well, you'll never get spousal maintenance, and maybe talking about, how do you know that? And the only way to know is to go to court. And is that something that you're willing to do? And sort of reality testing that piece, because you'll have to get lawyers, and then you'll have to spend money, and you'll be doing this for a year. What does that look like? Sort of reality testing that piece, and making sure that they're still on board with, oh no, we don't want to do that. We don't want to go into the litigation mode.
So that's one way of assessing readiness.
Right.
Is that they're choosing that as opposed to another option.
Right.
Okay.
Oh,
Tracey-Leigh had a question, if you don't mind, Georgia, and then you, and then I think we're going to wrap up after your question, Georgia. So go ahead, Tracey-Leigh.
Thanks, Michael. So Andi, what I just wanted to ask you is, in what way are these two mediation situations different from the spousal support sessions you've done in the past? What is that main difference that you've, on these two specifically, you've picked up and you just have an uncomfortability about?
Well, this is the constant struggle of, I find, with lawyer mediator hat, taking hats off and wearing my mediator hat. So my lawyer brain wants to say, you're not entitled to spousal maintenance. Let's be, this is easy. Let's move forward. Look at all this money you have. Look at all this income you make. That kind of, so, of course, that has to be switched off and start talking about process pieces, as far as, okay, so first let's talk about whether there's entitlement to spousal maintenance, and do we have an agreement on that? And I think that's the hard part in both of these, is that we have a yes, and I need a whole bunch of money, and no, zero. So we're being met with that piece. And I guess the difference is that there's a resistance to talking through, what if we did it this way and what if we did it that way, sort of options, that I'm met with the no. And I feel like we need to talk through these options in order to talk about, in order to process how the wives are feeling and what the wives are having concern about, without having such huge resistance from the husbands about even talking about it. So I think we're getting better with that. I mean, we've had, I think each of them have had 2 sessions. So we're working on, can we just talk about it? Can we just work through it? Let's really have these conversations. I think we're getting there, but I think the difference is just meeting with that initial resistance, and loud resistance, and, forceful resistance.
And can I just one question, Michael, to ask on that, please? So when you inside of yourself, how does it make you feel when you're seeing that kind of resistance coming from the one party? I mean, you are an attorney, so you know the law, but you've seen this rigid wall that's up. I mean, how does that impact for you?
Well, it's frustrating because I know as the mediator, if you work through the process, she might come to that conclusion on her own. But if we bully her into it, it's not going to work. So it's really frustrating that we're not getting to the conversation. You know, of course, if I was completely saying what I want to say, I would say, shut up. She has to come to this conclusion herself. So that's a big frustration for me, is just allowing that process to work. And I have that frustration with even attorney mediations, where the attorneys walk in and say, okay, this is easy, let's go. We'll be done before lunch. But I think that's the big frustration, is I have enough under my belt that I feel like if she could just talk through it and talk through the whys and the hows, that we could get it. She could come to this on her own. The conclusion would be reached on her own.
Thanks, Andi. Georgia?
Well, I don't know that we really have time for another question, but the one that I would ask would be, what other ways might you address the agreement readiness from something that's not the lawyer perspective, but some other personal concern of hers, maybe?
I mean, I guess I could ask her how she's preparing for the future and what her plans are as far as living. And I mean, we've come to the point where she wants the house and wants to buy him out of the house. So we've sort of talked about that, but I think that was a big piece of getting her to move forward, was figuring out where she was going to live and how she was going to manage that. But maybe that's a good exploration, is to talk through what her plans are as far as living and working and that kind of thing. It's a good idea.
And any other concerns that she might not have surfaced yet, might not yet really be able to articulate?
Right. Yep. Should have
So,
that conversation.
We're going to artificially end for the demonstration part, so we'll allow for, there are 30 comments and questions I see in the chat. I don't know how, I've been looking at what they are, so Nikki's going to help us with sort of identifying some of them. Let me just say that first of all, thank you, Andi, and to each of my friends and colleagues. Thank you for being here and for participating. You know how I feel about each of you and us as a collective. What I would also say is that this conversation, if it had been in our group when we meet for an hour and a half, would have gone on for another 15 or 20 minutes, would be my guess, maybe longer even, because it's rich with so much for Andi in terms of how she manages both the process elements in order to be able to help manage the content aspects. And there's a lot there. Sometimes in our conversations, they end, it's 10, 15 minutes. It's just like the husband in Andi's scenario. Boom, it's all done. Great, we're over, because that's just the nature of the issue and what the person needs from talking about it. And sometimes they go on for an hour. I had one group recently where the issue that was presented was, the mediator said, I was stunned when after 15 minutes, one of the parties walked out and the mediation ended. Well, the conversation about that 15-minute mediation took an hour and 15 minutes. So you never know. But let's go to questions.
So I
And I
think
hope-
generally the questions kind of divide into two on a kind of meta level. There were many of our participants who were kind of silent participants in the reflective process. So I don't know whether you want to address some of those or focus on the kind of larger questions about the process in and of itself.
Only about
Michael,
the process. Only about the process, Nikki,
Yeah.
because I saw some comments about the content, and
Yeah.
we're not going to go there.
Yeah, no, I think that's it's hard to restrain ourselves as
course it is.
practitioners from getting
course it is.
involved. But so one of the questions that was earlier on is from Jess Kent asking you, how has the reflective process been adjusted for cultural awareness? Is the experience useful in all scenarios, and is it most effective when completed in groups of mediators?
Well, first of all, I've only, no, I've worked in groups that have mixed professions, and it can work quite well with that. It's easier, I think, in lots of respects if the people involved have a sense of the process that's involved. So, for example, I've worked comfortably, and the people have worked comfortably, where they are both mediators and they're conflict coaches, because our practices are connected, or mediators and attorneys who practice collaborative law, where there is an understanding of what each other does in their profession. Across culture, the real question is making sure, or the real challenge is making sure that as I'm asking questions of somebody who is in another cultural setting, that I make sure that that among those questions are inquiry about how things are normally done, how things are normally perceived, how is conflict regularly handled in that culture, so that the process can work extraordinarily well. I've worked with people from, in addition to the US and Canada, England, Ireland, Nigeria, Trinidad, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and we've managed to do fairly well. I won't say that it's a simple thing when you're working cross-culturally. The level of attention, sensitivity, consideration for cultural differences is exceedingly important, because my values are North American based, and I'm not trying to bring my values to anybody else. I need to understand and work with their values. Andi, just to take Andi's situation, all of us actually are lawyers in the group, are lawyers, except the one person who wasn't here today, and and we're all mediators, but we all practice very differently. It's not just that we practice in different jurisdictions where the laws are going to be different than some of the procedures, but we're different human beings, different life experience, different education, different personal values that affect how we see things. I don't know whether anybody else in the group wants to chime in as well.
I would just add that one of the, in terms of the cultural difference question, that we're not telling people what to do. But part of reflective practice is, one of the key things is we ask, we don't tell. So we're asking the person who's talking with their questions to help them explore their own issue, instead of saying, hey, did you do this? Or, what you really should have said to the people is blah, blah, blah. And so it opens it up, because the person whose culture it is the person who's answering their own questions.
We also have, we've discussed previously with the group as well, it's really helpful that everyone has different backgrounds, not only culturally, but also professionally. As Michael mentioned, most of us are attorneys, but we do have different backgrounds. So for example, Georgia has a background in education. And so it really is helpful to have a diverse group in terms of even just professional backgrounds sometimes, because you get different questions that you would not think of yourself. So that's the really great part of being in reflective practice. We just recently did a discussion on a topic, and Georgia brought up a great question related to education that I hadn't thought of. And I don't think anyone else in our group had thought of, because that wasn't really where their mindset went. So it's really helpful, I think, for everyone to bring their different backgrounds, even in their questioning. It's a bit of the questions that you create are created by your own experiences, but it's really focused on the person who is also taking in that information and deciding what works best for them personally as well.
Could I say something? Not exactly with following what Kristyn said, but when I was asking Andi a question about agreement readiness, in retrospect, I was trying to get her to do something that she wasn't inclined to do. So I'm sorry, but that's one of the things that we should not do. And I did it, so you can see it.
And it doesn't mean that we all don't have opinions. We just try to restrain our opinions and follow the idea that it's best if the person, I mean, because I had all sorts of ideas for Andi. Why didn't you try this? How about trying this? How about trying this? None of which will come out of my mouth in our conversation, because that's me. That's my thinking. That's my experience. That's what I take away from having dealt with clients who are in a situation similar to hers.
Well, I think the interesting is, another interesting thing is that it doesn't end. Like, my thought process now is, gee, I'm thinking about other things that were asked of me, and I could caucus, or I could do all these other things. I think it just opens up that process piece for me in reflecting on it, and I'm not done with the conversation. I'm still thinking about things.
Yeah.
I think that leads into another question that just popped up, that was asking Andi about how the process felt for you, and whether you ever get frustrated with being posed questions rather than receiving advice. And thank you. That's Jill from London calling in, asking that question.
That's a great question. I think it's you are put on the hot seat, but it makes you think about things and talk about things that maybe are a tiny bit uncomfortable, because I felt like maybe I was saying the same things over and over again. But then after I have a chance to process it, then I'm thinking about more things. The main thing is that I didn't feel like anybody was judging me. I didn't feel like anybody was saying what Michael said not to say, you should have done this, you should have done that. Nobody was doing that. Everyone was just really supporting me in what I thought. So it's always good to be on the hot seat to talk through these things, for sure. I get so much out of it.
There was a couple. Oh, go ahead, Michael.
Sorry.
Oh, please, I'm waiting for you, Nikki. Absolutely.
Laurie, did you have something?
I was going to say, what we've all found is that when we're told to do something, or we've compared that experience of when someone told us you should do this versus finding the answer from within, that the being told doesn't help, because then you have this other person's idea over sort of powering what your own understanding of the situation is, and it doesn't resonate. So then you feel like, okay, so now I've been given a whole bunch of suggestions and none of those feel right. And you haven't explored what you know from your own experience, your own isolated experience as the mediator. And it makes so much more sense. It helps so much more to explore your own sense of what the answer is. And what we've also all learned is that that has amplified how we work as mediators, because we know now that our participants in the mediation, they have their own answers. And part of our job is to help them find them and not tell them.
Excellent. There's just one little kind of logistical question, again, from a little bit earlier that I wanted to fold into the discussion. And that was, what is the optimal size for this kind of a reflective practice group? And then also in that, there was a question about, is there an importance to geographic diversity or diversity? I think some of you had addressed that second part in a little bit, but I was wondering if you could have a more comprehensive answers and comments on both aspects.
I think, and to answer the first part, 12 is a good number, and a dozen. The ABA group tends to at times have as many as 15 or 16, and we work quite well. Our group with APFM is 7. So it can vary, but what you want to do is have a group that's of sufficient size so that in the length of time you set aside, whether it's an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, everybody has the opportunity, whether they choose to take advantage of it or not. Everybody feels as though they could participate. That's really key. I like the idea of diversity, geographic diversity. That I was noticing once in the ABA group, for example, that we had someone who was calling in from Hawaii, and our colleague on here today, Barbara Wilson from the UK, we spanned 11 time zones. And there's something about that that's dynamic, that's exciting. I don't think it's necessary. I wouldn't necessarily plan a group specifically with that in mind. But I love, me personally, I love the idea of diversity. And the other thing is that while the group today are family mediators, principally family mediators, there are other groups that have mixed, coming back again to the ABA group, we have, people who volunteer to do small claims mediations in a court service, and people who do commercial mediations, people who do environmental, people who do family. We had somebody who does patent, somebody who does architectural disputes. We're all over the place. Medical issues as well. So, it's how you create a group in which you feel, if you're starting from scratch, you create a group that you would feel happy participating in. That to me is the key. Are these people you feel you can learn with? Yeah.
Great.
One of the
Go ahead,
questions
Laurie.
that came up was how frequently, and we meet monthly. We fix it, second Tuesday of the month kind of thing. So it's predictable, and monthly works great.
We've come full circle and have now a question about confidentiality again, and how you address confidentiality concerns. I think that's probably the last official question that we have time for, since we're almost at the 10 o'clock hour, but I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on how you address that issue.
I'm open to anyone in the group answering. I'll hold off.
So I can jump in. We don't usually record our sessions. So that's one aspect of confidentiality. We're not recording it and we're not sharing it. So it's just within our group. We all also have an understanding of confidentiality within our group. And we try and keep things as vague as we can, but still get good information out of it. I think the big thing is just having trust within your group and just knowing that everyone has an understanding of the basics of confidentiality and that it's not going to leave this conversation. We don't use names of clients. We don't use specific details like how many funds they have or their assets or debts or their children's names or all of those aspects of things. We typically will refer to them very generally. So that will usually cover the gamut of most issues of confidentiality, but someone else in the group may have something to add as well.
Well, I think in addition, what you hear is that we don't ask for a lot of details, because that's the detail. Once you start asking for lots of details, you're getting into the substance, and that's not our job. We don't know, we couldn't know enough in the time allotted to be able to offer thoughts about the content. And so we get enough information so that we can help the person answer the question. And what also happens is that each person makes a decision with respect to confidentiality in this respect. They choose how much they feel comfortable presenting, how much they want to anonymize the information, and how much they want to particularize it. And everybody in the group, as we've all said, abides by a principle about confidentiality. Not only, as Kristyn pointed out, we don't record, but we don't talk about the situations afterward. So we do a variety of things to try to manage the idea of confidentiality while still providing an opportunity to learn together.
Excellent. Since it is 10 o'clock now, Maria or Julia, do you want to, I want to personally thank all of you for zooming in from everywhere, and especially you, Michael, for leading this wonderful session. Maria, would you like to close off the official portion?
Absolutely. I want to echo what Nikki just said. Thank you so much. This was just absolutely fabulous. We are going to officially stop the recording. Mike and the demonstrators, if you would be able to hang around for a few more minutes for informal chat, that would be great. But we have officially adjourned this morning's breakfast, and see everyone next year. January is our next breakfast. Thank you.